Step 4 is to specify whether a column can contain the value null or not. And this is very specific in databases, and it's at one of the properties that you set when you define a table. And with each individual column, you identify whether it's nullable or not. And we want to make this decision for each column. We want to consider the scenario and how it works in the real world. We want to make sure we understand databases. Null values can cause problems, so we want to avoid them when possible, but we also want to be very clear when nulls are allowed. So we'll go through each of these columns and see if we could have a null user ID. Nope, a null first or last name. Nope, each user is to have a first and a last name. Everyone needs a password. A type, so there's students, instructors, administrators, and combinations, but we wouldn't have a user that didn't have one of those types. Now what about department? Now remember that departments are not for every user. In fact, departments are just for instructors. So those that are students or administrators and not instructors, they would actually not have a department. So here we have a case where null is actually required. Now notice our default, we want our default to be not null. So I've left all of these initial cells blank because the assumption is they're not null. And if we're going to allow null to be an allowed value, then we're going to add the keyword null into that column. So department can be nulled. Major is something that goes with students but doesn't go with instructors or administrators. So this is a value that could be null, and in fact will be null for administrators and instructors that are not students. GPA and class standing, those are computed. Notice that those are only related to students as well. So let's go ahead and make those null values be allowed. Phone number, no, it said every user has one or more phone numbers, so at least has one. User ID needs to go with every single phone number, needs to have a user ID attached to it, so that won't be null. In the registration field, when we have a registration, we need to know which student is registering, so we need to for sure have the user ID. We need to know which section they're registering for, so that's the section number is required. Now the grade, so think about this. So in the end, everybody gets a grade for the section. But when they very first start the course, they're registered for it and their user ID and section number are recorded, but there's no grade at that point. In fact, the grade won't come till late in the semester. So this is again a case where the grade can be a null value. If we get down to section, the section number would not be null. Every section needs to have a number. Instructor. So part of what we talked about was that a section could be set up before an instructor is assigned. So you can't have a section without an instructor. So we want to put that. Now notice that we're tapping into the scenario and into our assumptions that we've written up. And so all this information comes from being familiar with the scenario and with the assumptions that we've got in our starting diagram. So if we're uncertain about that, we can go back and look at the initial diagram and the assumptions, or we can go into the problem statement itself and remember those details. Semester, each section has a course number associated with it. Each section is offered on a specific semester in a specific year. Every course has a building designation, right? It's 3 characters long, each building designation. And online has for their building designation O and L. And then there's a room number to go with each location. Now, the only one that might not have a room number would be online, right? Their building number, we put O and L in there to distinguish it as an online course. And this for sure would not have a room number. So that could be a null value for all online courses. Then we look in the course. Every course needs to have an ID. Every course needs a course number and a department. Every course needs a title and a description and a number of credits. So none of those will be nullable. What about prerequisite? So it is possible to have a course not have a prerequisite, but in that case, there wouldn't be an entry in the prerequisite table. So there just wouldn't be an entry at all. If there in fact is a course in the prerequisite table, right? If there's a record in there for a particular course, it's in there because it does have a prerequisite course. And anytime there's an entry in there where there's a prerequisite course, it's in there because there is a course that it's a prerequisite to. So in the prerequisite table, whenever there's a record in that table, there will be a value in both of those locations. So there we've gone through each column and identified those where null is allowed.